Next, the little-known story of a Red Army general, Andreyevich Vlasov, who was captured by the Germans, denounced Stalin and Bolshevism, and became the symbolic leader of the greatest mass defection in military history. He led the Army of the Damned.
Winter 1941. Hitler has attacked Russia. Since June, his armies have smashed through horde after horde of Russians until the Nazis are nearly in Moscow. But Russian soldier and Russian winter perform a miracle. Moscow is saved, and the Soviet press hails the loyal generals who saved the city. The youngest of them has been a Red soldier since early youth. He is 42-year-old Andrey Andreyevich Vlasov. Vlasov will fight another Red battle before fate changes the entire course of his life. Northwest of Moscow, Leningrad is besieged, battered on three sides by German guns. Inside the city, 3 million Russians are trapped, enduring hunger and bitter cold. Vlasov will come here to command a shock army, with Stalin's praise as a savior of Moscow still in his ears. The young Red general flies to Leningrad to join his new command outside the city. A Russian who was there reports Vlasov's words to his men. "We fight to save our fatherland. Leningrad must be saved." When Vlasov joins it, his army already is surrounded. It smashes through the encirclement under brutal German gunfire. But the Russians are caught again, break out, are caught, and eventually are surrounded for the last time. They hold out for 3 months, but their position is hopeless. The army is written off by Moscow, abandoned by Stalin, and its soldiers become potential recruits for the Army of the Damned. Vlasov's troops join almost 4 million other Russian prisoners taken by the Germans in the first year of the war, and among the prisoners is General Vlasov himself. He is held in Vinnytsia in the German-occupied Ukraine, where he broods over his lost army and struggles with doubts about the Stalinist regime. He is now aware that all Russian prisoners are not in German prisons. Many are in German uniforms as volunteers. From the Cossacks of the Don, even from Stalin's home state, the Georgian Republic. All willing recruits encouraged by German generals like Ernst Kestring. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda boss, is in on the act, painting Germany's war of conquest as a crusade against Bolshevism. Even he is surprised at his success when 700,000 Russians joined the German side in the early months of the war. This is the beginning of the largest military defection in history. Now Vlasov has heard from his prison. He has met with other high-ranking prisoners, and he writes a bitter, open letter to all Russians. It denounces Stalin for betraying the Russian Revolution and bringing disaster to Russia. Certain Germans see his usefulness, among them Reinhard Gehlen, Eastern Intelligence Chief, and Field Marshal von Kluge. Also interested are anti-Hitler Germans like Klaus von Stauffenberg and the ex-ambassador to Moscow, Werner von der Schulenburg. Both will die for plotting against Hitler. Vlasov, free after many weeks of captivity, confers with other defectors in Berlin. His prominence as a savior of Moscow and his open letter give him leadership of a paper army of Russian liberation. Nevertheless, the Germans have promised Vlasov a real army, and he seeks it in the bulging prisoner of war camps. Moving through German-occupied parts of Russia, Vlasov promises the people a free, democratic government when Stalin is overthrown. He is welcomed everywhere. One of those who heard him and followed him is former Red Army Captain Michael Shatov.
At the beginning of 1943, we met General Vlasov for the first time. He came to the Russian territory now occupied by the Germans. He visited towns and villages. He spoke of the difficult moments the Russian people had lived through. He spoke of the reasons which had made him decide to start fighting the Bolsheviks. All this was like a spark to our feelings. We understood General Vlasov. Each and every one of us wanted to join him, to fight under him.
But to arch-Nazis and race fanatics like Himmler, the Russians cannot be German soldiers. To him, they are Slavic Untermenschen, subhumans. Learning that the army welcomes the Vlasovites as fighting allies, he protests indignantly to Hitler. The generals have not told Hitler of the plans, and he is furious. They are hypnotized by their own propaganda, he says. Never, he adds, will we build a Russian army. Vlasov is placed under house arrest. He tells his staff Hitler has forbidden further enlistment of Russian volunteers. The 1 million already serving with Wehrmacht units will stay under German control. Vlasov secretly vows to work in defiance of Hitler for an independent force to fight Stalin.
Hitler was cleverer than all the others, than his generals who insisted on supporting this movement. He felt sooner or later the Russians would defend their own interests, that they are, after all, nationalists by blood, by origin, and they would surely defend only the interests of the Russian people, not of Germany. And, of course, the hope of the generals was stupid, as well as the dream of all those who thought that by giving arms to Vlasov, they would get him to fight for Hitlerite Germany. Hitler was right.
To neutralize the Russian volunteer force, Hitler moves 360 of its battalions west, scattering them through Italy and France. A proclamation forged in Vlasov's name tells the volunteers they are going west to fight communism. Many just fade away into the French Maquis to fight Germans instead. It is now 1943. The Germans also are moving west in retreat from the resurgent Red Army. The Nazis are haunted by one of Vlasov's own slogans. Russia, he has often told the Germans, can only be conquered by Russians. It is 1944. The Third Reich begins to crumble. Red troops return to their homelands, learn more and more of Nazi atrocities, become more and more united by hatred of Hitler. And for Andrey Vlasov, a reckoning is also looming. A defector from Stalin, he still may only pray for Russian freedom, not fight for it. Figurehead general of a phantom army, he may only dandle children of Russian laborers in Germany on his knee. Those who believe in him, both soldier and civilian, are demoralized. The vengeful Red Army creeps ever closer. Then a dramatic blow is struck at Hitler from inside Germany, which will affect Vlasov's future. On July 20th, 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg plants a bomb in the Führer's conference room. It fails to kill Hitler, but shakes the Reich. Von Stauffenberg and von der Schulenburg, both of them Vlasov supporters, and many others, are executed. Vlasov's stock should now be lower than ever, but the plot unleashes Nazi desperation. Defeat everywhere dictates a reversal of policy. November 1944, Vlasov goes to Prague, Czechoslovakia, chosen because it is the last Slavic capital in German hands. He proclaims a fight for Russian freedom. Even though it is evident Germany has lost the war, 60,000 anti-Stalin Russians enlist with Vlasov in a single day. The first units of the Vlasovite army form in Germany that winter. They wear uniforms stripped of German insignia and are equipped with captured Soviet rifles, tanks, and artillery. In early March 1945, the 1st Vlasov Division, an all-Russian unit, moves to the Oder River to fight. Vlasov and his army of the damned will at last face Stalin's Red Army. The Vlasovites hold a swamp in which the Germans already have suffered a bloodbath. The Vlasovites begin to suspect they have been sent here not to fight, merely to die. Across the Oder, red guns are zeroed in on every foot of their ground. It is too much. After heavy casualties, Vlasov orders his men to stop dying in Hitler's lost battles. Defying German orders to stay, the Vlasovites pull out, going south. Vlasov now has a freelance army in a crumbling world moving toward Prague. Revolt breaks out in Prague, but 2 heavily armed SS divisions hold the city. The Czechs seize a radio station, appeal to the Red Army. Just as in Warsaw, when the underground revolted, Red help doesn't come. Fearful of a similar SS slaughter, the Czechs appeal to Vlasov. He orders his 1st Division to help the Czechs against the Germans. The advance toward Prague is led by Colonel Andrey Arkhipov.
Never in all my life, after having fought in 3 wars, had I witnessed such a triumphal march as the one made by the 1st Division toward Prague. The whole road was strewn with flowers. The whole population from neighboring villages and towns had gathered to see the 1st Division as it was moving to save Prague. I received the order at 5 o'clock in the morning on May 7th to cross the bridges over the river Moldau, to take Prague and somehow save those who had revolted.
Russian soldiers in German uniforms fighting Germans amaze the Czechs. They also amaze Himmler's SS troops. The lightly armed Czechs had been no match for Nazi tanks and machine guns. But with Vlasovite aid, the Czechs are saved from a massacre. After a day of battle, the Nazis are vanquished. Vlasov has been a savior of Moscow. Now his anti-Red Army is the liberator of Prague. The Vlasovite victory, however, is brief. The approaching Red Army now brings danger. In the confusion, an American patrol arrives. Colonel Arkhipov.
Talking to those Americans who were officers, veterinarians, it became clear that they also didn't know what was happening. They thought we were Reds, the Soviet army, and so on. But then after we explained things to them, they said, well, now everything is changed in Russia, and since you have been here fighting, why, Stalin will probably be glad to take you back. Late on May 11th, we stood between the Red tanks and the Americans, to whom we surrendered our weapons, but who had not let us through the lines. The Reds waited while the Americans decided what to do with us. The decision of the American command, which was expected at 10 in the morning, would seal the fate of our division. On May the 12th, early in the morning, we received orders from the American command to cross the advanced American lines. We crossed the advanced American lines. They let us through, about 2 kilometers deep. And it was only now that the Reds caught on. Had they known before that we were disarmed, the Red Army would never have asked permission of the Americans. They would simply have attacked us and wiped us out right there. Here, on May 12th, at 1 in the afternoon, the final order of the American command was received. See here, our Russian friends. You have surrendered your weapons. So now, just scatter.
Vlasov himself has been seized by the Soviet Army. 15 months later, in August 1946, a brief notice appears in his Vestia, which once hailed him as a savior of Moscow. Andrey Andreyevich Vlasov has been hanged. He is called a traitor to the fatherland he once defended. Vlasov's army, however, still has one long march to make. Thousands like Shatov and Arkhipov manage to disappear into the wide, free world. Others, not so fortunate, cling together in what they believe is the safety of Allied internment camps. These Russians do not yet understand that the Western Allies have agreed at Yalta early in 1945 to return all Soviet citizens found in their occupation zones to Russia. When they do understand, they are bewildered, and bewilderment turns to fear, for many of them know only too well that their bid for freedom has made them wartime traitors to communism and to Stalin. They fear that the road ahead leads to Stalinist terror, to exile in the snows of Siberia, to torture, and to death. Many believe their fate only when they see the red star on the boxcar. Many try suicide, many succeed, rather than return to the home where there is no home. This is the last long journey for the Army of the Damned.